Does anybody have any general questions about where we are in the course and where we're going with this teachings on the not self characteristic and the 3 marks of existence? Okay. The Buddha awakened to the profound understanding that it is ignorance of 4 noble truths that leads to all manner of confusion, deluded thinking, and ongoing suffering. The uniqueness of this and what sets it apart from other religions, and I know I've talked about this in a few different ways, but the Buddha wasn't concerned, as were most of the spiritual seekers of his time, with answering the great questions of where he came from, who created this, is there a creator God, where does the Buddha go after he dies, where do people go after, all those great questions that men and women have been asking since we've been here, since we've been self-reflective. And the Buddha realized that seeking that type of answers to those questions was just another distraction, that was irrelevant to the problem of suffering. Suffering wasn't caused by a lack of understanding the answers to those great questions. The problem was asking the questions in the first place. The problem lies in the thinking that creates that type of insistence that I establish myself in some permanent way and in a way that elevates me to a certain extent. The Buddha realized that self that we're trying to describe in a mystical and cosmic way is always in a constant process of becoming, and there's nothing mystical or cosmic about it. It just simply is the nature of self. The not self characteristic refers to the word anatta, which means not self. The Buddha used that word, a word common in his time, but uncommon in his usage, to say just that anatta, the views that you're holding of yourself do not actually constitute a self. They're wrong views. Let go of the views. That points directly to our thinking is the problem. It's not a lack of knowledge of the environment we live in so much as framing the questions correctly within the framework of the Eightfold Path. So, because of that lack of understanding, we create assumptions about ourselves in relation to the world, or fabrications. And those fabrications, those wrong views, cause us to establish a self in a way that is unreasonable, meaning it's permanent, it's fixed in place, it can be described at any point in time as a permanent me. And I use certain things to describe me. I use this physical form, take a look at me. I use the way that I'm feeling often to describe myself, don't I? And I also use the conditioned thinking that I'm caught up in to describe myself. Perceptions, and also part of fabrications. And I maintain that by an ongoing state of consciousness that is rooted in that initial ignorance, known as conditioned thinking. The 5 clinging aggregates are form, feeling, perceptions, mental fabrications, and that ongoing consciousness. The 5 clinging aggregates describe the personal experience of suffering caused by that initial ignorance. Is that clear, that last line? So understanding that last line gives direction to the entire path, doesn't it? I don't remember what I said.
Something about ending and ending. Never mind.
Yeah, I'm just trying to think of how I stated it.
You were summarizing with 5 clinging aggregates.
The 5 clinging aggregates describe the personal experience of suffering rooted in ignorance of 4 noble truths. So the 5 clinging aggregates describe the personal experience of suffering. So another way of saying that is John is suffering because he's ignorant of 4 noble truths. Notice the phrase isn't John is suffering because he's ignorant. Because if the Buddha stopped there or I stopped there, you're lost. But if I can find a specific way to address my ignorance, meaning knowing how to frame it and look in the right direction. I'm not looking through infinity to find the answers. I'm looking in a very specific place through the Eightfold Path to end my ignorance. So looking at it that way, John is suffering because of his ignorance of Four Noble Truths, points directly to, well, wait a minute. John can end his suffering by developing understanding of Four Noble Truths. It points directly to the path. And it should be looked at that way. That's the reason why the Buddha taught an Eightfold Path, is to end ignorance of Four Noble Truths. Judy.
Okay, so then, and forgive me, I haven't been here for these weeks when you've been discussing this, so I apologize.
Glad you're here.
Repeating, but, so given that, I mean, we still, things happen to us and we still have emotions come up, right?
Yep.
And so there is suffering. I mean, that's the first noble truth, right?
Yep.
So how is it that if you look at suffering within the framework of the Eightfold Path, you won't have suffering anymore? I mean, how can you not have suffering?
No, that's it. Yeah. Thank you for that. It's such a great question. And it comes up in different ways. The Buddha describes suffering this way. Birth is suffering. Sickness is suffering. Aging is suffering. Death is suffering. Or dukkha, stress. Not getting what is desired is stressful. Getting what is undesired is stressful. And there'd be a few other qualifications, and then he would almost always close this description of dukkha as saying, in short, the 5 clinging aggregates are suffering. So that simply states that as a consequence of having a human life, there's going to be stressors in life. And describing it in that way, birth, sickness, aging, and death, not getting what you want, getting what you don't want, which is obvious to all of us, isn't it? That happens to us. There's no way that we can get away from it. We can't escape it. So let's learn to accept it. And that's the big difference. And this isn't the whole Dhamma, but that radical acceptance of life as life unfolds is the significant difference between what the Buddha taught and what everybody else taught. And up until this day, there's nothing that addressed the nature of dukkha directly in the way that the Buddha did, getting at the source of the suffering, not trying to solve the problem in an outward sense. In other words, change the outward conditions. And the reason why that wouldn't work is that the outward conditions are all based on impermanence. In other words, it's a game of whack-a-mole. You can never directly address the outward problem because that problem's already in the past. Or it's something that's coming up, which will never come up. Do you see the problem? When we're externally focused, it's always in the past or the future. We can only deal with our minds as our life occurs when we develop the mindfulness within the framework of the Eightfold Path. In other words, being present with life as life unfolds, and as those stressors that are a natural part of life unfold. Because then in the moment, if I'm practicing restraint, then I won't insist that something be different than it is as it unfolds. And the natural stressors of life won't have their normal stress-inducing effect on me. Because I understand the nature of the world. I understand the nature of suffering. I understand the nature of my own suffering and the suffering inherent for everyone in this environment of anicca. I no longer react to it. And that's wisdom. If I understand something in my mind, there's no reason why I would react to it. I'm at peace with it because I understand it. Is that clear?
No, I don't get it. What's bothering me is the
I see your hand up.
It's the acceptance of your suffering. That is not that we suffer, because we all suffer. So it's the ignorance of being able to accept what's happening is what you're talking about. No?
Yes, because you're lacking an understanding of how things really are.
Yeah.
And you're taking things personally because of that lack of understanding. In other words, a stressor arises and I insisted I shouldn't be experiencing this stressor. Everybody else in the world has the same stressor that I do, or it wouldn't be occurring in my life. But I don't want it. I don't deserve it. Things should be different than they are. Do you see the self-reflection in that?
Yeah.
When it's simply a consequence, there's nothing personal in what has gotten me upset or distracted. It's simply a consequence of having a human life. An awakened human being, and you kind of pointed to it before, awakening the best description I know is fully mature, a fully mature human being. A fully mature person understands who they are in relation to the world and the life they're living. And so they no longer react to it. They maintain a calm and peaceful mind because they understand at a very penetrative level the nature of things. There's no reason to lose my mind over something that has already occurred or may occur, because it's simply part of having a human life. And then there's other contributors. There's things that I choose that add stress to my life. Eating 2 chocolate cakes a day is going to do it. But I can learn, I can gain some wisdom just in a very practical way. But living in I'll hear along the way that somebody will say, 2 chocolate cakes is probably not healthy. Somewhere along the way, I'll pick that up and I'll make a conscious decision. Okay, I'm going to integrate that knowledge into my life, and I'm going to keep it to 1 chocolate cake. And my weight keeps going up. So I look for some more understanding. What's the problem? And I realize that one cake is too much. And so I'm using the world that I'm living in to increase my understanding of myself in relation to the world. Now that's practical teaching. 1 piece of cake is enough a day, maybe once a week. In the same way, the problem of my thinking has to be addressed where it lies. I have to have a framework for addressing that. And that's where the Eightfold Path comes in. So we learn that, again, as a consequence of having a human life, there's going to be suffering. There's going to be stressors. But if I can understand that what constitutes me is in a constant process of becoming, then I can be at peace with what's becoming. And I don't have to react to it anymore. I don't have to be distracted by what's occurring anymore. It doesn't mean, and we gain the profound understanding, and this is where we start losing it until we understand the nature of the Dhamma, is because we get approval and acceptance mixed up. We think that in order for me to accept something, I have to approve of it as well. That process operates from anatta, from a misunderstanding of what a self is. I'm in charge of everything, which means that I have to approve of everything as it occurs. And anatta gets that over distracted with the world, but because of just that, I need to be monitoring everything that's occurring if I'm going to maintain this ego self in the moment and as each moment unravels. Anatta must establish itself in every thought, word, and idea that occurs. That's the ongoing stress of life by needing to do that, even if it's not conscious. So as we develop understanding and learn to accept ourselves as our life unfolds, all that falls away, and we're simply present with life as life unfolds, without the need for it to be any different. So did that answer your question?
Yes, thank you. Mm-hmm.
Did it?
Yeah.
So it's the nature of self, not self, to insist that things be different than they are. One way that it does that, it wants more of something that gives it pleasure. Another way is it develops aversion against things that might take away from its pleasure or already has and has had that experience, creates conditioning against that. That's all part of dukkha. And it's all part of the way we look at ourselves in relation to the world. So what has to be addressed is the way we look at ourselves in relation to the world. Again, shining the light directly on the not self characteristic. It's my views of what constitutes me in relation to the world. That's the problem. And so that's what I need to look at, the not self characteristic. That's where we are here. The 3 main themes that the Buddha taught are the 3 marks of existence: the impermanence of all things, the not self characteristic, which describes the misunderstanding of the self. Now remember, the Buddha is describing the nature of suffering in the world. It's just what's occurring. And because of a misunderstanding of the not self characteristic and the impermanence of all things, dukkha arises. Those are the 3 common experiences of every human being. It's not right or wrong. It's not mystical or magical. It just is. It's a statement of truth. And so now I need to gain a deeper understanding of that truth, because it's what's occurring. How do I do that? Through the Eightfold Path. Diane, you've had your hand up for...
One of the things that I do to understand some of this is ego doesn't want me happy. Ego says to me, if you don't get what you want, then you're not happy. If you do get what you want, you're still not happy. So one of the things that I take a look at with this not self is, okay, that's the way, the nature of ego, wanting me, doesn't want me happy, isn't happy when I am happy. So, or when I do get what I want. So there's something beyond this to where I need to go. And that, to me, that's the Eightfold Path of right view, of, right action, and check, where I am beyond ego.
Yeah, thank you, Diane. I'd be a little bit cautious with objectifying ego that much. I mean, I know it's just a way of looking at it. So maybe you're not doing that. But using the phraseology, you could be giving ego too much. There's nothing there. Ego's like foam on the ocean. There's no substance to it, except it's what we're dealing with. And so it's important to remember that all of these things that's wrapped up in an ego is just like that. It's like foam on the ocean. There's nothing there. There's nothing of value. There's no real power there. It's only maintained by its own ignorance. So that ego self will create any type of scenario to ignore its own ignorance, including overcomplicating a very simple Dhamma and keeping itself confused by creating these conceptual applications rather than just the direct. Yeah, I mean, and it works, doesn't it? That really is the essence of the problem, is what we do in our own minds to continue to ignore what is really obvious, what's right in front of us, the truth of our own existence. But we'll make it much more complicated than we need to. Hi, Becky.
Good morning.
Good morning.
What really helped me with everything that you just said is when you said accepting something doesn't mean that you approve of it. That was huge for me right there. That was like, to say that you can accept without approval is makes the understanding much clearer to me.
Yeah. I'm sorry.
It's just fine.
No, because
It's
that's
life, right.
It's really getting to the heart of the matter.
And also the idea of being a mature human being and understanding your sort of place, I guess, and not getting sucked into immaturity, because so much happens that right now, especially in my life, things are happening where if I didn't have some understanding of this practice, I think I would be getting sort of sucked into immaturity, where people are saying things to me that I know are just coming from their delusion, and I am just trying to accept that without approval. Now that I mean, I've been accepting it, but I've also been like not wanting it to happen and wishing that they could see the light. I mean, that's all coming from me.
Yeah, and think about what you described something in your mind that you want to be different than it is.
Exactly.
And it's not that the situation can or should be different. The only way to relieve the stress is to change your thinking. In other words, it's not the object that's causing you stress, it's the way you're thinking about the object.
Without approving of it, and then finding just accepting it. And then when there's an action I need to take, it will be apparent.
And that seems so contradictory to an ego self.
Yeah.
The ego insists on being its policeman of the world. I need everything that happens in my life. I need to either approve of it or disapprove it or ignore it, which is that third aspect that we've been talking about, that the indifference to most of our life that we experience. And I won't get into that right now, but we talked about that last week.
Okay. So thank you.
Thank you for bringing that up. that idea, think about that just a little bit more. The idea that I need to approve of what's happening in the world, whether it's occurring personally to me or just in general. Think about, I mean, why? Why would I want to have to approve of everything? It's happening anyway. Why would I mean, just in a rational way, why would I want to take that onto myself, that I have to control every single thing that happens in my life? Yet I do. Because I'm John Haspel on Anata. But that's it. The Buddha recognized the subtlety and brilliance of his thinking is what allowed him to see that, to have enough clarity to get past his own self-reflective views. Now, we talked about that before in the Nagara Sutta, where the Buddha describes his awakening and the self-reflective views that he's stuck in. And if I get to it, I'll talk a little bit about the Loka Sutta today, where the Buddha describes his first thoughts on the world. But he's describing gaining an understanding of self-reflective views and how to put them aside. And we need a way to know that we're doing that. We need a mirror to know that we're reflecting our views back on ourselves. The Eightfold Path is that mirror. Again, I'm overemphasizing that a little bit too much. But the Eightfold Path was a path put in place by an awakened human being to recognize and understand the three marks of existence. And most importantly, to recognize the not self characteristic and abandon everything that follows from that we're attached to. There were a few hands up. Anthony?
Yeah, the way that I look at it is like whatever you don't accept, you tend to focus on, and whatever you focus on grows. It's like fanning a flame.
Yep.
So if you're angry at someone and you can't accept the way they feel about you, you're going to keep thinking about them, and then the hatred's going to grow more in you.
Yeah.
And it even applies to like body sensations, because if I'm sitting down meditating, oftentimes I'll feel a pain and I'll try to accept it and not focus on it. And then I notice that I'm thinking about something completely different 5 minutes later and I forgot about my pain.
Yeah.
But if I'm thinking about my pain, it continues to get worse.
Yeah. That's right.
It's like that. You can apply that to everything.
Everything.
Feelings, thoughts, pain, sensations.
Yep.
It's just the way the universe.
Yeah. Just the way the universe. Again, it reflects Four Noble Truths, just the way things are. And in order to accept things as they are, we have to understand that things are as they are, don't we? Before we can have that acceptance. Again, it points back to we have to understand the environment that we live in if we're going to be able to have that type of radical acceptance. That radical acceptance is what Kandana experienced when he awakened hearing the Buddha's words for the first time. Remember that Kandana heard the Dhammacakkappavattana Sutta for the first time? Heard those incredible words, and he awakened. He said, all conditioned things that arise are subject to cessation. He's talking about impermanence. And he's talking specifically about his own conditioned mind that has arisen to establish himself in this impermanent environment, hopefully in a permanent way that can't be done. But he's also understood the passing away of those wrong views, of the establishment of Kandana with conditioned mind. All of those thoughts that arose have now passed away.
Yeah.
The conditioned Kandana that arose in ignorance, and now think about this. This is the kind of things that get me going a little bit more. Put yourself, what was that old newsreel thing? It's not, everything is as it was then, except you were here. You were there, whatever that was. So put yourself in that place back 2,600 years ago, and you're one of the 5 that heard the Buddha's first words. You're Kandana. And you hear those words. The Buddha simply described the Four Noble Truths and the path leading to the cessation of suffering. Described it, talked about it, just like we do here. Kandana heard those words, realized that everything I've been thinking about myself in relation to the world up until this point has been based on ignorance. And he let it all go. And the Buddha said, you are now Anakandana, the one who understands. He developed a deep penetrative understanding of the nature of impermanence and the not self-characteristic and the resulting dukkha. That's why Kandana awakened. That's where we're going. Or at least do you understand that that's where we're going? Mm-hmm. We're developing an understanding not of the great questions. We're developing an understanding of what's occurring in our life right now. And isn't that much more important than to know where I might go in a future life? Or a speculative and it can only be speculation about how I got here. To me, what's more important is where am I going in the next moment? And that points me into the importance of maintaining my mindfulness right here, right now. Because if I'm going to go into the next moment mindful, I need to be mindful in this present. If I'm going to go into the next moment well concentrated, the only way I can be assured of that is to be well concentrated in this moment, right? We got to be careful now we don't get fixated on the present moment, because there's no such thing as, that idea that we have to be in the now all the time. That can't happen. But what we can understand is that we're always in a process of becoming, and what we hold in mind will determine what we become. We can either become more ignorant if we maintain and cling to that ignorance, or we can awaken if we establish and maintain wisdom. So the Buddha's words in relation to this, and this is also in relation to dependent origination, but also to the second noble truth. The first noble truth is that dukkha occurs. The second noble truth, how come you're not telling me to slow down, Lorna?
Very excited. You're very excited.
I am clinging to the idea, and I crave to the notion that when I start talking too fast, you're going to tell me to slow down or throw something at me.
Develop a hand signal.
So,
Now is coming. We don't have time. We don't have to learn it all.
you all can tell me to slow down when I'm getting too excited about the Dhamma. So the first noble truth is that dukkha occurs. The Buddha is simply stating that as a consequence of having a human life, there's going to be suffering. It points directly to what you were saying, Judy. Since there's going to be suffering, there's going to be disappointment, there's going to be unsatisfactory experiences, get over it. Don't take it so personal, and don't react to it. Because nothing's personal in this world. How could anything, think about it this way, if I'm in a constant process of becoming, how could anything be personal to it? Because it's already changed. Once I've decided that I'm taking this personal, I'm already something else. I'm already into the next moment. But if I allowed my mind to get agitated because I wanted the past moment to be different than it is, then my present moment is agitated, and my future moment is too. You see how it gets into that idea of becoming and being mindful of what's occurring? Because it's only in that process that we can actually make any real change. But it's outside of that process that we direct our energies towards what's occurring, towards developing useful mindfulness within the framework of the Eightfold Path. Is that clear? Useful mindfulness
karma.
within the Eightfold Path. Pardon
You
me?
just described karma.
In another way, and thank you for bringing it up, because we're gonna get into that obviously in a few more weeks. But karma is a present moment unfolding of past intentional actions, moderated by the present level of our mindfulness, meaning what we hold in mind. So karma is another word to describe the 5 clinging aggregates or the ongoing personal experience of suffering. If you want to know what your karma is, look in the mirror. What's occurring right now is your karma unfolding. But we also have to understand, I don't want to get into the class in 2 weeks, karma is not punishment and it's not reward, even though it's often portrayed that way. In fact, going back to the Vedas, where karma got its start, I guess, that's how it was presented. The Buddha studied that and rejected it, but he used the word karma much like he used the word anatta. He used a common word in a very uncommon way, and he used it to describe karma in that different way. Did I answer your question, Anthony?
Yeah.
And Lorna, you had your hand up?
No.
Oh, anybody else before we? Okay, so dukkha occurs, first noble truth. The second noble truth states that craving originates and clinging perpetuates dukkha, getting right to the heart of the matter. So if I want to develop wisdom where there was once ignorance, this is what I want to study, right? If I want to understand the nature of dukkha, I'll study what an awakened human being taught about that. I want to learn what he taught anyway. The Buddha says, and what is craving? There are 6 classes of craving. Craving for forms. This is who I think I am, so I'm going to maintain this no matter what. Craving for forms, craving for sounds. Notice how the Buddha's now reflecting this craving to the individual senses, where it arises in contact with our 6 sense base. Craving for sounds, craving for smells, craving for tastes, craving for physical sensations, and craving for ideas. A self-referential ego self is so enamored with its own thinking that it can't wait for the next idea. And once that idea occurs, because it's self-referential, there's already an attachment to it. And it's already a truthful and reasonable idea because I thought of it. Now remember, this is ongoing consciousness rooted in ignorance. So I'm just kidding myself, aren't I? Unless I have a way of looking at this, of framing this. So whether I realize it or not that I'm deluded, according to the Buddha. Unless I have a way of recognizing my own ignorance, there's no way of recognizing it. So I can go through my entire lifetime never realizing that it's the way that I'm looking at myself in relation to the world that's the problem. And if I don't realize that, I'm going to spend my entire life blaming outside circumstances for how I'm living my life, for whether I'm disappointed or not. I'm going to spend my entire life in that disappointment unless I realize the nature of the disappointment, that I'm responsible for it. Goes right back to what you were talking about. I'm responsible for it based on my level of mindful acceptance of life as life occurs. And I can do that if I understand life as life occurs, if I understand Four Noble Truths. Then something happens and it just happens. It didn't happen to me. And so that thing that is constantly self-reflective and not self-characteristic has been abandoned. It's been recognized and abandoned. It's been recognized as an assumption, as a thought construct. And of course, if I'm in control of my thinking, then like the Buddha taught in the Vitakka-Santhana Sutta, I should be able to think what I want to think when I want to think it. Right? If it's my thoughts. Well, I can't do that if I'm distracted, but I can do that if I develop an Eightfold Path. That's what the Buddha recognized. That's why he recognized the importance of deepening concentration, because it's a mind that is rooted in ignorance that attaches itself to constant distraction to maintain that ignorance, to ignore its own ignorance. The Buddha could have nearly accurately described the First Noble Truth as saying there is distraction because it's the constant preoccupation with dukkha that distracts us from our life, that allows us to maintain our ignorance. So the strategies to continue to ignore our own ignorance are necessary to continue suffering.
That's where I get a bit woolly with my thinking. All this, the ideas that are rooted in the doctrine of myself, and a true idea of what a good idea is without a doctrine of myself within it. So that's, in my mind, when I think about my thinking, I can't always discern which category I'm in.
Yeah. And so the need for the framework of the Eightfold Path. When you're not sure, use the path to look at what aspect of the path am I off to have this experience right now, to be agitated, to be upset. Look at it. It might be right view. It might be that you're in wrong view, taking things personal, and relate it that way. Oh yeah, that's why I'm feeling this way, because I'm taking things personal. That's not right view. And then remember right intention. My intention is to recognize and abandon craving and clinging. What am I clinging to in this moment? What am I craving for? Abandon it. And it's just that practical. But it's just that important.
It's hard to spot, though.
Pardon me?
It's hard to spot the difference.
It is at times. So we start where we are, and I know you've experienced it. Usually most people begin to experience the Eightfold Path through right speech or right action, usually right speech. Because it's when we start integrating that framework, we're able to recognize right speech. Why? Because we're doing it all the time.
Yeah.
Especially if you're me. I mean, and it's in our relationship with the world that we understand the Dhamma too. That's why escaping the world in any way doesn't work. Meaning going to live in a cave for 12 years. I mean, if you want to go, that's fine, but that's not an answer to the Dhamma. Because you have to be in the environment you're living in order to accept it. Another way of saying that, it's much easier for me to accept dukkha when I'm in a cave, removed from the world completely. And again, there's many good reasons to go off in seclusion and spend your life like that. And that's great. If any of you feel like doing it, go do it. I do it, but it's not just that. There's more to it. We have to have an eightfold path. It's not just isolation that develops awakening.
You go in a cave.
Pardon me?
I said you go in a cave.
Well, I've spent time in minutes. The Buddha continues, and what is feeling? Feeling has 6 classes as well. Feeling arising from eye contact, from ear contact, from nose contact, from taste contact, from body contact, from intellect contact. This is called feeling. So the Buddha's relating now the 5 clinging aggregates to our consciousness, right? And then he says the same thing in what is contact? Phenomena contacting those senses. And what is name and form? Now I'm not getting into dependent. Name and form is namarupa. I put a name to this form. And what is name and form? Feelings, perceptions, intention, attention, meaning what I'm holding in mind, and contact. And what is name and form? All of those things that we use to describe the personal experience of suffering is suffering itself. The Buddha often describes the experience of suffering as joining with our suffering. We attach ourselves to it through self-identification. Discriminating consciousness is name. Discriminating consciousness is name. What does it mean? Discriminating consciousness means I am discriminating between what I like and what I don't like, what I approve of, what I don't approve of. Discriminating consciousness is name. Once I've identified myself as this, I've now set in motion that conditioned discriminating thinking. I like this, I don't like that. Or I'm indifferent to what's occurring. That's what that line means. Discriminating consciousness is name. Think about that just a little bit more. Discriminating consciousness is God. I'm using that in a arrogant sense, not in a creative sense. I'm the one that decides what is right and what is wrong. I'm the one that decides what is good and what is bad. I'm the one that decides what I like and what I don't like. And by the way, since I've become so good at that, I think I can do it for all of you too. And if you don't listen to me, I'm describing how stress arises. And so if all of you would just start listening to me, I would not have any stress in my life anymore. That's how we do it. And that's how, and from that misunderstanding, you can see how all conflict in the world arises.
Yes.
From that initial ignorance.
What do we do?
Pardon me?
How do we respond when you do that?
When you do what?
When you lord over us, or you're addicted?
Oh, yeah. I mean, and yeah, look at the difficulties in that.
We can't just sort of ignore it and say, I'm going to just accept this. I think you'd still suffer, wouldn't you?
Oh yeah, and so look at what I mean. That's going on in the world right now, isn't it? Under certain other people.
What should our response?
Oh,
Accepting that ourselves.
you again. The response is initially the Eightfold Path, and so to understand what's occurring, if you happen to be in a situation in the world where you're under just a brutal leader, what can you do? The only thing you can do is not take it personal. It doesn't mean that the awful things might not continue. You might hear awful. I don't want to go that far. The only thing we can do in any of those situations is to not take it personal if we're going to maintain a relatively calm and peaceful mind. It's all that we can do. And I think using that extreme example is a good way of making the point. But we can also do it in the less extreme experiences of life unfolding. Is that clear?
It is. I'm not sure I believe it.
Yeah.
Oh,
Well, you can take action,
Yeah.
right?
the Buddha would say that's fine. He would say, ehepasiko, you come and see it for yourself. You have to do that. And the only reason you can, the only way you can believe anything is to have the actual experience of it. But you can take refuge in the knowledge that a human being did this. He left his Sangha, he left his teachings so that you could do the same. And we have a Sangha right here that is supportive of developing the Dhamma. We can take refuge in the Dhamma. And that's what it means. So we don't have to believe it. It's the problem with the self-referential ego self that it insists on knowing something before it takes the leap into it. But of course, we can't do that with the Dhamma. We have to experience the Dhamma. We have to let go of those views that are driving us in that way. Did I address your question?
Yeah.
Okay.
I think it's really, really important to, for me anyway, not doing an I thing. When stuff comes up in meditation that's painful, that's I don't like about myself, and unless I experience that and allow it to flow through me, I get all kinds of, the ego thing will take this thing, oh, that's not you, go away, fluff it off, don't pay attention to that. And the truth of the matter is, I have not always been what ego thinks I am, this innocent saint with a halo. I've, had evil, wicked thoughts, and I've done things that I'm not proud of and stuff like that. And through meditation, I am confronted with that. And when I let it pass through me and the awareness comes on the other side of it, there's more compassion. And I think it's, this is an important part of the Dhamma, of the Eightfold Path, is what comes up in meditation I can't ignore, but I let it pass through me and I feel it. And I know I'm being repetitive, but I just think that's an important part of what we're talking about, is what I see in the world is in me. And that's, to me, the whole thing of what's important about this is I have only me to heal or to improve, whatever it is we're doing here. I can't fix the world, but I can, and I don't want to say fix me either. Whatever, I'll leave it at. I just think
Thank you.
it's important.
It is, yeah. That's why meditation is that concentration that we develop in meditation allows us the radical acceptance that you're describing. The Buddha goes through the rest of the aggregates and connecting them to our sixth sense base, meaning he does it with name and form, with perceptions, with mental fabrications, and with consciousness. And the Buddha's words. And what is consciousness? There are 6 classes of consciousness. There's eye consciousness, ear consciousness, nose consciousness, tongue consciousness, body consciousness, and intellect consciousness. The Buddha's, again, just describing that as things come through our senses, we are discriminating through that consciousness rooted in ignorance. That's the type of consciousness. And we do that with each one of the senses. In other words, something appeals to something I'm seeing, and I say that I like it. It has the thinking follows the contact with my eyes, right? Or maybe another way of saying is that the sensory perception is driving the thinking. Now, because that thinking is rooted in ignorance, what it has perceived is rooted in ignorance. Another way of saying is what it's looking at can't be trusted. Because it's not in reality, because the perception is wrong. And if it's true about any instance, it's true about every instance, isn't it? If that thinking is rooted in ignorance. I'm sorry, I'm trying to decide how to finish the class because it's getting late. I'm just going to read a few more. I won't get into the Loka Sutta, I don't think, today. But the Buddha continues, and what are fabrications? There are 3 fabrications. There's bodily fabrications, verbal fabrications, and mental fabrications. And then the Buddha says, and what is ignorance? Diane, you brought this up the other day. Ignorance is the key issue, isn't it? But it's not it's not that we're just ignorant people because we're human beings. It's a very specific ignorance. And ignorance means a lack of knowledge of something, any subject, correct? It's just that's what ignorance means. Lacking understanding, lacking wisdom of a particular thing. The Buddha says that ignorance is not knowing stress, not knowing the origination of stress and not knowing the cessation of stress. He says that ignorance is not knowing the eightfold path leading to the cessation of stress. He concludes that by saying that's ignorance. He's describing the ignorance that he's talking about in a very direct way so that there can be no misunderstanding. I mean, think about it. One of the most remarkable things that I've realized after reading a lot of the Pali Canon is the Buddha never wasted one single word. And he certainly didn't hear. He's simple and direct. It's our thinking rooted in ignorance that continues to create strategies to ignore its own ignorance that makes this complicated, that says it needs to be something different than this, that it can't be this direct. But of course, it has to be this direct if we're going to overcome our tendency towards distraction, towards deluded thinking. I can't get in. I'll finish with this, and if you want to, we've talked about the Loka Sutta. I would suggest you read it. Next week's talk, if I get to it, is going to be on the Bhava Sutta, which is one of the suttas that's mentioned in that article. The Loka, the Bhava, and the Mula Sutta are all part of one series of articles. So if you could read the Loka Sutta this week, and maybe we'll talk more about it. But I just want to conclude with this. The Buddha describes awakening. Now, from the remainderless, meaning there's nothing left, from the remainderless fading and cessation of ignorance comes the cessation of those fabrications. The link in the 12-link chain of dependencies has now been broken once you understand ignorance. There's no more fabrications. So the stress and the suffering that follows, the I-making that follows, cannot. Ignorance can no longer be born again in this mind that has awakened. And that's the true teaching, the most useful teaching on karma and rebirth too. From the cessation of fabrications comes the cessation of consciousness, comes the cessation of thinking rooted in ignorance. From the cessation of fabrications, the Buddha is teaching that in order to have that thinking rooted in ignorance come to cessation, you have to let go of your fabrications, of the assumptions you've made. You have to have a way of looking at that, recognizing the foolishness of it, the ignorance of it, and let it go. Is that all clear? Do you see how simple and direct the path is when you look at it correctly? Getting right to the heart of the matter. From the cessation of consciousness comes the cessation of name and form. Remember name and form, nama rupa. I've identified this as me. From the cessation of consciousness, thinking rooted in ignorance, comes the cessation of self-identification. It just happens. It's not something that we manipulate. From the cessation of thinking rooted in ignorance comes the cessation of self-reflective views. Another way of saying that is from the cessation of self-reflective views comes the cessation of self-reflective views, because it's just that circular. From the cessation of name and form comes the cessation of the sixth sense base. And of course, it doesn't mean that we die or we stop having our senses be useful. They simply, when a person awakens, develops full human maturity, they simply stop using their senses to interpret the world in a way rooted in ignorance. That process has come to cessation. And now we can use our senses to maintain mindfulness of life as life occurs. In a way that can interpret life from the point of view of wisdom rather from the point of view of ignorance. And that really is its own reward. From the cessation of the sixth sense base comes the cessation of contact. From the cessation of contact comes the cessation of feeling. And that's simply describing that I am no longer reacting to the world. Eva, good to see you again. Glad you made it. And from the cessation of craving comes the cessation of clinging and maintaining. Once I cease the incessant craving for a self-referential existence, clinging falls aside too. It simply happens as a consequence of developing the Eightfold Path. From the cessation of clinging and maintaining becomes the cessation of becoming further ignorant. That's why the book is called Becoming Buddha, Becoming Awakened. It's the choice that we have in each and every moment, to either become awakened or become further ignorant. From the cessation of becoming comes the cessation of birth. From the cessation of becoming further ignorant comes the cessation of giving birth to another moment rooted in ignorance. The Buddha is describing how to develop the Eightfold Path and actually awaken. And from the cessation of birth comes the cessation of sickness, aging, death, sorrow, pain, distress, despair, and confusion. Wisdom brings a cessation to the entire mass of stress and suffering. The Eightfold Path is the path developing that wisdom. That's today's talk. So any questions directly related to the talk, and then we'll go around the room. Lauren.
Just when you went down Dependent Origination,
I see you, Joe.
you described the cessation of your senses. Well, let me say how I thought it was. I thought
Take care, Mary.
you would
Good to see
use
you.
your senses just as a means of interpreting your environment.
Yep.
But that's not quite what you said. You said something else. But I thought that's so that you're no longer taking anything personal, you don't bring it to anatta or anything, you just interpret, your senses just interpret your environment.
Yep. Your senses then establish a reference point to what's occurring, period. But it's hard to understand the concept and not attach an I to it. Well, what's referencing what here? It's hard to understand that concept.
Mhm.
So, but when and this is where the understanding of the Dhamma is so important if you're even going to go in that direction. Because if you have to understand that awakening is part of that process of becoming. It's not, there's a strict distinction between awakened and unawakened. But there's an ongoing process towards awakening or developing awakening, and so we're in that, in a state where there's often a lack of equilibrium because we're almost in two places at once. At times it feels like that. We're struggling with that I making and practicing restraint until we awaken, and then there's no more struggle left because we don't need to practice restraint because we're awakened. It's simply a natural consequence of who we are. Did I answer your question?
Yeah.
Okay. Deb.
I just want to kind of expound on that. What I heard you saying about the senses was like when we're in the right place. I mean, when we let go of the senses as craving and clinging, and you said something about now we're mindfully using our senses to keep us, to experience life as life occurs.
Yes.
And so I was thinking an example of that is like eating, mindful eating, like instead of eating to comfort ourselves or because we're craving food and, eating it and, just to fill up or whatever, then we'd be using our senses to feed ourselves and be aware of the taste and to nurture ourselves. I'm not thinking of nurturing myself, but just because we're there nurturing ourselves and being in the senses in that way, in a mindful way.
Yeah. Thank you. And being able to do that, meaning being mindful with your eating and just being present, not taking it in any personal way,
Right.
enhances just that experience. It makes eating a meal meaningful. Those that have been on retreat on retreat, we don't have silent retreats, but our meals are taken in silence. Take care, Diane. But our meals are taken in silence. And one of the reasons is just that, to generate that experience, that just being present with something as intimate as eating. So thank you with that. Jen.
Hi.
I'm glad you're here today. It's good to see you.
Sorry, I'm busting your chops.
Yeah, I got a lot in my head that I want to cover about this, but
Yeah, I think most of what happened, everything, I really enjoyed this class because I just watched myself react to what everybody else was saying a lot of the time. It just, I don't want to say this about that. Oh, I can say this. This would be really insightful, and so that was interesting to just kind of watch because this is
you know, again, I don't know, it's a topic that's just exciting and it really does get to the heart of things. And that's, you know, you just want everybody to understand all the time. That's where I am as a teacher. I just want people to, you know, I just want to impart wisdom on everyone. So much ego. So I think the thing that keeps sticking in my mind that I just really want to say, and I know this is speaking from maybe I'm making, but the initial thing that you started talking about, and then Judy asked a question about, was the first noble truth being dukkha occurs. That is already ego, because if stress is arising and something's reacting to it, that's suffering.
Yeah.
Ego is reacting to it, whether it's my ego reacting to it or someone else in the world reacting to it.
Yeah.
Suffering is happening.
Yeah.
So even if suffering is happening and I'm at peace with it, or, you know, I'm accepting it as it is occurring, it's still happening. And that's,
Well, here you're getting to something. It's
still happening. And I think we get caught up in saying that if someone else is suffering, then I am suffering, but that's ego.
It's ego. Again, there's the significant difference between what the Buddha taught and religions in general. Religions teach suffering as a consequence, is a payback for behavior. In different religions teach that in different ways, but most, in general, that's what religions teach, that suffering is kind of payback for sins, use that word. We learn that it's got nothing to do with that. It has to do with what we think and how we act in a general way. It's not something that's being imposed on us. It's something we create in our own lives, that nature of suffering. So it's a completely impersonal experience. Excuse me. I'm sorry, I lost my train of thought there too. Talk about a well-concentrated mind.
But yeah, that was something that I was noticing, was that the stress arising versus ongoing suffering, those are two different things. The first noble truth is stress arises, which implies suffering, doesn't necessarily mean I'm suffering.
Yes.
And that's kind of where I feel like that can get confusing. And that's where you cling to the idea that, well, I'm never going to not suffer because suffering occurs and dukkha occurs, you know. And
well, there's the I in it.
That's what I mean. Yeah, that's kind of what I'm.
That's the I making.
See,
yeah. So using that, I'm never going to not suffer.
Yeah.
Bringing the framework of the Eightfold Path into that, you realize, well, wait a minute, right view says that it's impermanent.
Mm-hmm. Right.
And all I need to do is to come into the present, like Anthony was describing, come into the present moment. And the external suffering has ended. I still might be in my body's 63 years old. It's never going to be 23 again. You know, but that's just, I could lament that. I could regret that, you know. I could spend my days, and I could spend the next years of my life spending 8 hours a day in a gym trying to keep this thing going forever, couldn't I? And so lose a good portion of my life trying to maintain or establish permanence where it can't be. The other thing that you got me thinking about in relation to religion would also tell us that we should be concerned in an irrational way of the suffering in the world, and concerned in a distractive way. And any time that we think that we can do something that is not achievable, but we attempt to do it anyway is a distraction, isn't it? Wouldn't that be a description of a distraction? To think that we can stop the suffering in the world contradicts an awakened human being. The Buddha declared, as a consequence of having a human life, suffering will occur. What can we do about it? We can develop full maturity so we don't contribute to the suffering in the world, and that's really all that we can do. And then be mindfully present to support others. And that's in a very practical way. It's not in a conceptual way. Someone needs a helping hand directly, and you help them. Or they need a kind word, or they need a little bit of direction. You help them that way, but not in a conceptual way. Because then we're just taking up causes. So, and again, the Buddha recognized that, and so he decided to deal with this, with the problem of suffering directly, meaning teach a way that as individuals we can cease our contributions to our own suffering, or he had a choice to establish yet another religion and distract away from that problem. He decided to teach a path that directly addresses suffering. So, thank you. Lorna, good to see you.
Yeah, thank you. I kind of
Good to see you, Judy.
questions along the way. Sorry. But anyway, I have just come through quite a difficult time, you might say, with the passing of my mom and having to go for the funeral, etc. But I just want to say I was very comforted with the Dhamma teachings through a very difficult time. When I was attending my mom's funeral, I was still having referential thoughts. And I could have been very hard with myself, saying, I'm just not a compassionate person thinking of myself at such a time. I could have said to myself that maybe I didn't ever love my mum to be thinking of myself at such a time.
Yep.
I could have just gone down a whole rat hole of downing myself, because as the Buddha says, all your thoughts are referential, even when you're attending your mum's funeral. And I was, well, in awe of the Buddha's words at that time, but I was also helped through a very difficult time by the understanding that I have through yours and the Buddha's teachings, that actually I was just behaving normally.
Yeah.
And that was, I can't tell you how much help that was at that time. So, thank you.
Thank you for saying that. And it's just that way. The Dhamma should be and is practically experienced that way as a more calm and peaceful life. Just the way it is. But it's great when you recognize it, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Astounding.
Yeah. Thank you. Becky, good to see you.
Good to be here, John. I don't really have a lot to add. I learned a lot today. I enjoyed the class. I enjoyed listening to people's questions that really reflected things that I was feeling confused about. And so my confusion was cleared up. So, thank you.
Thank you for being here. Anthony, good to see you.
Good morning. I was going to say anything, but then I thought maybe I can contribute something very briefly.
Please.
I don't do this myself all the time, but I like to try to look at challenges as welcoming with gratitude as an opportunity for growth, because every challenge is a spiritual opportunity for growth. It's almost like when I was a kid, I used to play this game with racing cars, and you'd have to go, you could control the speed, and you'd have to go along these curves and not crash into a wall. And that's kind of like how life is. And if you don't have challenges, you'll never grow. So if you look at them as a welcoming opportunity to say, hey, now's my chance to go down that race course and not crash into a wall, you know, it's a wonderful thing. It can be, you can change the mindset of it. Instead of something that's stressful and horrible, it's something that's now, here's my next challenge. Here's my chance to grow.
Yep. And
Because if you don't have challenges, if you live in a cave, like you said, you're going to be peaceful, but you're not ever going to grow.
Yeah. And it's just that way. And we're so fortunate to have this teaching that's still here, that has us grow towards awakening, not just, it's not generalized self-help. It's something that actually delivers awakened human being.
Yeah, I mean, we learn all these great things. So without challenges, how do we ever get to practice them?
Yeah.
How do we ever know if they're going to work?
That's right. Thank you. Ken, good to see you. Welcome to our Sangha.
Thank you.
How was your meditation with us?
Good.
Good.
It was actually faster than I thought.
Did good. Do you have any questions? I know this is a little bit out of context today. But
No, I was just going to, if I could make a comment.
Please.
I really like hearing the way reinforcing the impermanence idea.
Yeah.
And I think of it as if you walk over and look at the river and your eyes look again, you're not looking at the same river.
Yeah.
And that's how I'm starting to learn to live my life, is that I'm in that river.
Yep, we're just that way.
I just have to go with, drift with the current, and sometimes the river's rough, sometimes it's smooth.
Yeah.
But like you said, nothing stays the same, so this too shall pass thing, so I'm gonna have to keep reminding myself,
Everything.
life is life.
Yeah. How is your meditation practice at home? You
I'm good.
good? Okay. A couple minutes, 3, 4, 5 minutes.
About 10, 15.
Oh, good. Good for you. Glad you made it today. Debbie, good to see you. How are you?
Good to see everybody. Well, I won't be here next week, so I'm okay.
We'll miss you.
I don't really have anything much more to add. The questions were helpful. Still feel a little bit confused about some things, but this is a confusing chapter for me. I think it's the most confusing chapter in the book. About clinging aggregates. I'm starting to get that, and then the 12 causative links or whatever. It's all, but I got a little bit more understanding today, so that was helpful.
Good.
Questions were helpful.
Yeah. Thank you. I'm glad you're. This is the essence, the core of the Dhamma. So we are penetrating it to pretty deep levels, and there is that. As you're going from one mind to another mind, from a confused mind to awakened mind, there is. I talked about it a little earlier. There is that bit of equilibrium that seems to be lost. But that's where right effort comes in too. That's why the Buddha taught that 6th factor, the Eightfold Path, to remind us to continue and to have their experiences. One of the things about a Sangha and talking about this is we hear other people talk about how well it works, that it really makes changes in our lives. And we learn from each other, and we learn because a human being did this and he left his teachings, that we can actually do it. And when we hear about it on a continual basis, we understand that it is doable too. And that's an important thing, to understand that I can actually do this. Gives me the license to go ahead and do it. If I don't think I can do it, I'm not going to do it. And probably knowing my ego, if I think it's going to be all that difficult, I probably won't do it. But because I can start slowly with 2 or 3 or 4 or 5 minutes, and I can learn the Eightfold Path as I go along, I don't have to get it all in one sitting, it's doable. And then I have, one of the most amazing things to me is the Sangha that's developed here in Frenchtown. And we have that supportive Sangha. We have it. Every class is like this. We support each other in our awakening. And what's more important, especially today, but what's more important than awakening? Thank you for a great class. I believe Matt's going to be teaching Qigong here in 15 minutes, so I hope you can stay. Qigong is just a great addition to the Dhamma. It's a very complementary, and Matt's understanding goes a long way too. He understands how to bring the two different philosophies together. They're not that different either. We'll finish with the Karaniya Metta Sutta, as we always do. And I think the only reminder is our retreat's coming up. It's a couple months away. May 17th to the 20th. So if you're going, sign up. Okay, find your relaxed meditative posture and gently close your eyes and gently close your mouths. And again, take a moment to become mindful of the your in-breath and your out-breath. And these are the Buddha's words on metta from the Karaniya Metta Sutta. This is what should be done by one who is skilled in goodness and who knows the path of peace. Let them be able and upright, straightforward and gentle in speech, humble and not conceited, contented and easily satisfied, unburdened with duties and frugal in their ways, peaceful and calm and wise and skillful, not proud or demanding in nature. Let them not do the slightest thing that the wise would later reprove. Wishing, in gladness and in safety, may all beings be at ease. Whatever living beings there may be, whether they are weak or strong, omitting none, the great or the mighty, medium, short, or small, the seen and the unseen, those living near and far away, those born and to be born, may all beings be at ease. Let none deceive another or despise any being in any state. Let none through anger or ill will wish harm upon another. Even as a mother protects with her life her child, her only child, so with a boundless heart should one cherish all living beings. Radiating kindness over the entire world, spreading upwards to the skies and downwards to the depths, outwards and unbounded, freed from hatred and ill will. Whether standing or walking, seated or lying down, free from drowsiness, one should sustain this recollection. This is said to be the sublime abiding. By not holding to fixed views, the pure-hearted one, having clarity of vision, being freed from all sense desires, is not born again into this world. Thank you all for a wonderful class, and thank you all for joining online there. Peace. Oh, so we're going to go over the 5 clinging